It's intriguing to think that the human body is over half water. To me, it seems like as our earliest ancestors crawled out of the sea, they needed to bring that life-giving water with them. And in essence, I think it was a Star Trek episode that said we are sort of ugly bags of mostly water. And that's the truth. We are bags of mostly water surrounded by this skin, somewhere on the order of 60% water, somewhat salty water. And it only logically follows, I think, then that when the United Nations was looking at their sustainable development goals, two of them have to do with water. One of them, of course, with water for drinking and water for sanitation, the availability of water in order to keep humans healthy. But the other side of it is the water itself and the life that lives in the water, looking at life below the surface of the water. And today I am so happy to be able to talk to someone who has been addressing that issue of life in the water and what humans are doing to the water. We've got one of the most inventive and creative experts in the world, or at least someone who's devoted his entire life so far, it seems, to this. Only 26 years old. His name is Boyan Slat. He's from the Netherlands. And when he was 16, he sort of got disgusted and noticed and thought, I need to do something about this. And by the time he was 18, he'd formed the Ocean Cleanup. It's a foundation, a nonprofit, and then doing research in great detail and multiple studies, and expeditions to test those studies, right to the point of building hardware now to attempt to clean up what we call the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, the little traces of plastic that we as humans have created, have dumped through our rivers and boats and things into the oceans, and are now floating around indefinitely because plastic's so tough, right out there in the ocean. And how do we clean that up? And so it's a delight to have a chance to be able to talk with Boyan today. And Boyan, welcome to Elevate Endeavour.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to talk to you as well. And that was actually a great introduction. So thank you.
Thanks. We've had a chance to meet before at other tech events at Generator in Toronto. I, of course, have been watching you through the media, really interested in your recent successes. But Boyan, if it's okay with you, instead of starting just talking about yourself, I want to start by talking about plastic. It's got its own life cycle. You know, it's essentially a human invention, but it goes from birth right through to its usage, and then its death or lack of usage, and then its eventual absorption back into the natural environment of the earth. And I don't know anybody who's more expert than you, but how about if we just talk about plastic at first? I think some of the numbers I've gotten, we currently create on the order of 300 million tons a year of plastic that we're putting into our oceans. You've been looking into it far more detailed than I. Just for the average person who doesn't think about plastic too much, how does the whole plastic cycle actually work?
Sure. So plastic is a relative recent invention for when you look at sort of the human timescale. It really was only invented sort of in the late 19th century. We got the first sort of prototype types of plastic, and then really only after the Second World War, it really took off in terms of plastic production. New types of plastics were invented, which turned out to be incredibly useful. And in terms of that, they're lightweight, they're very durable, and cheap and easy to manufacture, which I think in turns has brought a lot of value to society in terms of, say, preserving food, in terms of making, say, cars lighter weight, things like that. So it's definitely not a very easy story of plastic is pure evil or something like that. Of course,
right.
I think most problems are a bit more nuanced than that, where the reason that we have the problem is that it's a bit of this a double-edged sword, where yes, it brings us a lot of value, but at the same time, products are being put to market made from these very durable materials, which don't have a plan for end of life and actually don't have a lot of value at the end of life either. So it's very hard to sort and separate, because again, you have many different types of plastics. So and these don't mix. You can't just put them together and recycle them into one new object. You have to separate these different fractions, and which is actually quite costly, especially in the light of the very limited value of the plastic at end of life. It's actually much cheaper to just make new plastic than to try and recycle it at this point in time. So this creates this massive sort of dump of waste around the world, of course on land, but eventually through, say, rain and wind, it also ends up in our rivers, and the rivers, they take it to the ocean, where it creates really a lot of damage to ecosystems, to economies, by hampering tourism and impacting fisheries, as well as the humans. It has an impact on our health as well. So it really is an interesting material. It brings a lot of value, but it has this big negative side effect that we need to manage.
And without some sort of gravestone or disposal plan for plastic, how long does it last? Like, how long before? I know there's lots of different types of plastic, but you're just on average or across the whole scope of it. When we peel something open that has plastic on it and we put it into our garbage, and if it by accident blows into a river and goes into the ocean, how long is it there for?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, but it depends on the type of plastic and the type of shape of the object. But generally, what we see actually in the garbage patch is plastics that is still in recognizable shape. So something like a crate or a bottle, actually with production dates on it from the 1970s. And well, it doesn't look as new, but it's still it's still there. It's still in the same shape, so we can really expect this plastic to last for maybe hundreds of years, even in a very tough environment like the oceans.
And yeah, which is a pretty rigorous place for anything. I mean, it erodes, stone into sand. But
Yeah.
and where I know you've done studies and operational tests, and you've taken fleets of ships and driven through this great Pacific garbage patch to try and understand exactly where the plastic is, because obviously that's a big part of trying to then figure out how to clean it up. So we had a look at the life cycle of the plastic, where it came from, and the fact that it's there for on the order of centuries just due to its natural toughness. But where in the, I mean, how much of it floats? Where in the ocean do you actually find it?
Yeah. So there is actually 5 areas in the world where plastic concentrates. We call these ocean garbage patches. The largest one is between Hawaii and California. It's the so-called Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And we think it's actually larger than all the other 4 combined, which are in the other oceans of the world. So so that's the one where we have focused on so far, and that's also where we aim to start cleaning the oceans. Of course, there is also plastic in coastal waters, but this we think is mostly plastic in transit. So plastic that has been released from rivers in a not too distant past, and will either soon on coastlines or will eventually make its way to one of these ocean garbage patches.
And in that garbage patch, I don't know, how deep did you go during your sampling? Like, does it mix all the way down to the bottom? If you go to the bottom of the Pacific, is there a lot of plastic down there, or is most of it accessible at the surface? I'm just trying to get my hands around what is the scope of the problem, so that we can have a look at your solutions that you're working on.
Sure. Yeah, so we did sampling down to 2,000 meters of depth, And
Wow.
really, what we find is that that really in just the top few meters, the majority of the plastic resides, which in a way is good news, because that means that most of it is still accessible. But it's also bad news in that actually most life is kind of near the surface because that's where
Because
light is.
it needs the sunlight, of course. Yeah, sure.
There, yeah. So and secondly, what we see is that the very tiny piece of plastic that we find, sometimes indeed up to 2,000 meters of depth, those are of the same sort of type and the same consistency as the plastic we see at the surface, which means that it's probably actually fallout from the plastic at the surface, which is slowly making its way down, which kind of puts a bit of a time pressure on cleaning this up at the surface, because if we don't do that, then all the 90-95% that's still really at the top of the ocean will eventually make its way to the deep sea, which yeah, of course, which will be, well, I hate to use the word impossible, but it will be really, really hard to ever retrieve that. And yeah, so I think we better hurry up.
And obviously, because the shallow part of the ocean is where a lot of the life is, especially the more complex life, uh, the plastic ends up getting not just floating there, but getting ingested by the whales and by seabirds and by fish naturally enough. So what we've got, of course, is then a human created product that we haven't taken entire life cycle responsibility for, and we've sort of been treating our oceans as a dump. Like the oceans are huge, and so you don't see most of them from where all of us live. So we've just been allowing this problem really to naturally distribute itself during the entire life cycle of plastic so far. And what you're doing is trying to help solve that, right? That's the whole purpose of the projects that you've been involved in since you were a young teenager.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, it's just seeing the problem in reality is really quite bizarre in that you're on a boat, you're more than 1,000 miles offshore, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're supposed to see a pristine environment, and you just look around you and you see pieces of plastic all around you, um, and of course, in a way that, as you allude to, that's part of the problem. It's out of sight, out of mind. So, but of course, the problem is still there and it's real. So, I think we should collectively do something about this. Of course, on one hand, stopping new plastic from entering the oceans in the first place, but on the other hand, also dealing with the legacy, because this plastic is so persistent. It's like so it's not like, say, smog, where if all the cars would become electric, the smog disappears. No, it's much more persistent, like that, like, say, carbon dioxide, which, if you turn off the tap, there is still a lot of excess of material in the atmosphere, and the same thing goes for the oceans. We also have to deal with this legacy, and that's why I believe we also have to clean up the 70 years of damage that has already been done.
I was out, oddly enough, on a submarine, on a British submarine, and we were way out beyond the sight of land. And we came up to the surface and got up to the conning tower and opened up the lid on the conning tower. And I stuck my head out, and a beach ball blew by, a plastic beach ball out there in the middle of the ocean. And obviously, someone unthinkingly on shore had lost control of it, and now it was adding itself to the. I think you've put numbers out like 1.8 trillion, which is such an unbelievably huge number. 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic as sort of an estimate when you count it all up and extrapolate it out as to how many pieces are in that garbage patch. So that's an amazing picture of the life cycle of plastic and the problem that we're facing. But I want to look a little bit at the life cycle of Boyan Slat, if I can. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were born in the Netherlands and you live there still. and your dad's Croatian, I think. Your dad's an artist, and your mom is you're regularly in contact with her there in the Netherlands. But I wanted to ask, because I've seen the oceans from space. I used to think about the oceans as a kid, and I'm like you. I started scuba diving when I was young, but seeing them from space, the vastness of them, it really sort of uh, modified and cemented my perception of what they actually are. And I wanted to know what that was like for you when you were a kid growing up in the Netherlands, and maybe with a little bit of European travel as well. What were your dreams and ideas of the oceans, and how has your subsequent experience, especially when involved with the ocean cleanup, how has that been modified? What were the oceans to you when you were a little boy?
Yeah. Ah. So, so obviously, spending time on the beach as a, you know, young child, I yeah. So I did mostly encounter the ocean during family holidays, and I actually, of course, with this project, I getting the chance to actually go offshore and on a vessel and going far away from land. I can imagine. Of course, I don't have the sort of the overview effect as you had, but just the immense scale of this environment. It's literally 2/3 of the surface of our planet. That's not the perspective you get when you are, playing on a beach and digging digging or building castles or things like that. Um, so it's I think that doesn't fully answer your question, but it is really how my perspective on this ocean changed. Um, it's quite staggering that humanity has accumulated this level of power that we actually have in our capabilities, the ability to modify this vastness called the ocean, which is actually not too long ago. I think it was a concept that was completely alien. Like, nobody could imagine that we could have any measurable impact on the oceans, and now, in many perspectives, when it comes to fisheries, when it comes to climate, when it comes to plastics and other pollutants, we actually are having impacts on this area. So, but yeah, I think the scale is it's really hard to describe.
And just as an aside, when I first got to space, because it was such a weird change to my body, I got what we call space sick, and it really came upon me quickly. Like I'm a fighter pilot and a test pilot, and I thought I'd be fine, but the weirdness of being there and the difference of being away from normal land, being on board a spaceship, and I was scrambling for my sick bag, and I was sick for the first 2 or 3 days on my first trip to space. Do you went with the same thing at sea? Do you get seasick?
Well, it's funny you say that because I do have an issue there.
Well, me
Actually,
too.
that's yeah. I'll save you for all the details, but yeah, going on a ferry to the UK, and it being probably like a gale, force winds, so maybe about 4/8, and I think I once actually accidentally did vomit over actually a stranger that I didn't know on that ferry, um, which I mean it's still the case, not the vomiting over strangers part, but the seasick is still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it,
Yeah, you are trying to save the oceans, and you trying to save the oceans, and me trying to explore space, but we're just human bodies out there, and both of us getting motion
yeah,
sick. It's not
quite
nearly
ironic.
as glamorous as people might
Yeah.
think. Who are You've led a very unusual life. You just turned 26, right? And you've started into this quite early in life. So why? I mean, who were the influence? Was it your dad as an artist? Was it your mom as sort of a caregiver in your life? Was it people that inspired you? Why are you not doing the same thing that everybody else is doing? What drives you? Who were your, I don't know, your inspirations? Any particular person, or do you think it's just cumulative? Any of your teachers?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Yeah, I do. I find it interesting. Very often in sort of biographies, authors write into lengths about the characters' childhoods and try to sort of explain the things that they did later in life, um, really completely by the actions of their early lives. And I think one thing that's pretty underestimated is just the sort of the genetic component in behavior. Just purely looking at that sort of nurture perspective. And because really, I remember, so recently I found an old video camera in my parents' house, and I tried to play the little tape, and I actually footage of me when I was probably around 1.5 years old, and I was playing with the buttons on a washing machine, and my dad was saying, he's probably going to be very technical later in life because he was very, very fascinated about machines. And actually, when I was 2, I decided I wanted to build my own chair just because I thought it would be more fun to have your own chair than something you could
Hmm.
buy in the store and it would be kind of me shaped or me sized and fitted for a 2-year-old boy. So I took some nails and wood, and I actually crafted my own thing. And yeah, so um, I've always been very passionate about making things, and always fascinated about technology. And it went from sort of little carpentry things to building my own computers to sort of rockets and explosives. Really lots of fun with that. And
Hey,
I think when I
I
was
read
around, yeah, sorry, go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt. I read somewhere when you were 14 that somehow you convinced over 200 other people, and I think it's a funny link to water,
Yeah,
to see how many water rockets you could fire off all at once. And I don't know if it's coincidental that water was involved, but how did it became like it's a Guinness World Record? You and 200 and what 13 other people launched simultaneous water rockets at a university in the Netherlands. So uh, that that's not normal. And just briefly, why did you do that?
yeah. Why did I do that? Good question. So I was just, I was just building things, and I was building one of those things because I think in more children build water rockets. I think that's not very special. But I thought, how far can I take this? So then I thought, maybe I should have the record of the highest launch. I was thinking related to the biggest water rocket. I was actually thinking of launching a friend of mine as well, but then I was doing some calculations with a physics teacher of mine, and turned out the G forces might be a bit problematic with the the
Yeah.
initial burst. So didn't do that one, but then I thought I can also try and launch, see how many I could actually launch at the same time, and that's what I then did. And was kind of my first experience doing a project, organizing the support of the university, and yeah, it was kind of fun to see them going up at the same time. And yeah, there is I like what you're saying. This kind of going from water in plastic, from plastic in water. So I've really thought of that.
Yeah, you just said, how far can I take this? And there's something I read. The internet, you never know for sure, but I think at some point in the past you said, I don't understand why obsessive has a negative connotation. I'm obsessive and I
Mm,
like it. I get an idea
yeah,
and I stick with it. Is that accurate? Do you agree with that?
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think most things fail because people give up too quickly. And probably in our existence with the ocean cleanup, there have been a multitude of moments where probably any sane person would have said, "Well, okay,
Hmm.
um, we've tried everything, it's not going to work. Let's forget about it and do something else. But yeah, I think that's not really a way of doing things. And I also just think the problem is yeah, kind of too important for that. But yeah, I kind of tend to have an idea, I want to see it through.
So nature versus nurture. You think there's a lot of nature in you that makes you build chairs when you're 2 years old, and and really want to stick with something to try and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really recall any particular sort of formative moments that trigger that. So yeah, and eventually, of course, every behavior is kind of a combination of nature and nurture, but because nature is kind of the foundation, and yeah, that's probably yeah, quite an important component to that. Yeah.
But it seems like early on, though, you recognized that it's important for, especially for a big issue, and maybe you even realized it when you fired your 213 water rockets up, um, that public awareness is important. That if you're just doing it on your own, then you're not influencing the ideas of very many people. And something that seems obvious to me is throughout all of your work, that right starting from a TED talk that you gave when you were just, whatever, 17 years old or something, um, that public awareness is an important component of your understanding of how to make this work. Is it deliberate?
Well, sure. So, look, obviously, this problem is way too big to solve alone, and yeah, we need a lot of people, really smart people to help with the research and the engineering, and we need a way larger group of people to actually help make it happen in terms of spreading the word, and the funding and the organization with all the partners that are involved. So so yeah, so it was pretty crucial, I think, that we rather than trying to sit in a little shed and try and come up with the best idea, sort of in voluntary solitary confinement, we actually said, well, no, let's just share this journey with the world, and let's take people along with it for the ride. And there's sure going to be ups and downs, and if they're downs, we're not going to hide it. We're just going to share it and ask people for help and give feedback and input. And that's sort of the way we've operated so far. And yeah, I think we do tend to get positive responses from that, from people who say, well, "Thank you for for being so transparent." And I think just the amount of support we've received from people around the world really has been, I think, truly inspiring, and got us where we are today. And actually, when I started the ocean cleanup, I thought, this is such a giant issue, and such an obvious thing to clean up. Maybe the problem is that people just don't care, and I think very quickly I was proven wrong. That assumption was incorrect because of just the tremendous amount of support, which kind of fomented for me the belief that that was not the limiting factor. It was really just technology which was missing, and which really, to me, was evidence that I think if we get this to work, I think it's going to happen. It's technology is the missing link, and that's why the ocean cleanup really focuses on giving humanity the effective and efficient tools to tackle this problem.
And you have been working on developing those tools. I mean, it's probably worth just running quickly through the timeline here together of how you got to where you are to now be right on the very brink of making a substantial change in the amount of plastic in the water of the world. But I mean, there's some anecdotal stories of what originally triggered your attention to this specific issue, so that you could start applying your own particular set of skills to it. And it was when you were on a scuba diving trip. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was 16 years old, and it's actually still family holiday, and I it was actually the time was getting my real scuba diving license, and I was quite looking forward to that. You see all these beautiful things in the documentaries, and I was like, wow, I'd love to see those things. So I went underwater for the first time, and I looked around me, and I just saw more plastic bags than fish, and I was yeah, quite shocked with that, and disappointed. And kind of simple question popped in my head: why can't we just clean this up? And that's the question I've been trying to answer for the past 8 years. And yeah, it's really what was the foundation for the ocean cleanup.
And so that was around 2010 or 2011 or so. And
Yeah,
and so you started the ocean cleanup when you were 18 years old, is that right? In about 2012?
yeah, 2013, 18 years old. That's right.
And yet by 2015, this 18-year-old kid who had noticed a problem, by 2015 you have 30 vessels
Hmm.
crossing the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, doing a sampling to try and understand the scope of the problem that you were addressing. How did you get from here to there? I mean,
Yeah,
most people would just say, okay, well, it's a big global problem. I'm just a kid from where I'm from, and I'm just going to go to university. And I think you were studying aerospace or something. I'm not going to, this is somebody else's problem to deal with. How did you get from that initial, the thing that pissed you off when you were diving, um, to getting to the point where now you're starting to understand the problem well enough to take action? Just how did you make that happen?
yeah. Well, I think it again comes down to really the support of people with whom I guess, our mission resonated. Where um, one of the first things that we did was we organized a crowdfunding campaign, and we said, hey, if you want to help this project that tries to clean the ocean, feel free to get involved. And quite a few people did that. I think we had within quite a short amount of time we raised $2 million from, I believe, around 40,000 people, which was
And you've
really.
used you'll use the collective pronoun of we. So at this point, who was we?
Yeah. So actually, I was allowed to still use a tiny office in the university building, and just put some posters around the campus. Say, well, hey, if you want to help clean the oceans, just send me an email.
Huh.
And yeah, so it really was just a small group of volunteers. That was all we were back then, of just people who sort of after studies or after work came by and helped make some plans and make some designs. So it was really quite a sort of humble beginnings, but of course, eventually we were able to hire the first people. Eventually, organize that first expedition, which was really mostly again a sort of a crowd-driven initiative. Where yes, we did charter one large research vessel to do the more difficult trawling, because we didn't just want to measure the small bits. We also wanted to measure the larger plastic. So we needed a big boat for that. But all the others were just volunteer vessels that were
Huh.
competing in a sailing yacht race from California to Hawaii. And then we gave them a little sampling device to take back from Hawaii to California. So that way we got a very large spatial coverage. We got great data, and yeah, we really believe that you can't solve a problem if you don't fully understand it. So that was, I think, a really important first step.
I think that that's a really useful lesson for a lot of people is, what makes you mad? You went diving and it made you feel that something was unjust, right? You're mad and you're like, okay, well, what can I'm just, I'm 16. What can I'm still in high school. What can I do about this? But then you started talking with some friends, you got organized enough, and then you realize, okay, we need some money. And you found a way through crowdsourcing and getting enough of a public voice that other people, even though they weren't at your school, could join in. And then you started analyzing the problem. And I think people skip over that part of it because it wasn't just that, semi-volunteer and partially chartered thing across, but you were out in the North Atlantic multiple times also, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's when I remembered I was prone to seasickness. on the, on the, uh, it's like the worst feeling, but I'll save you the details. But yeah, I agree. I think understanding the problem is critical, and indeed, just starting, I think, is critical. I really didn't know what I was doing back in the day, but just by taking it step by step and being open to learning as you go, I think eventually you can actually make quite some progress. And I think there may be actually a third lesson there, which is, yes, I think if you read about sort of, famous inventors in the past, I think most inventions start with something that annoys you, right? Something that like, why is this way? Like some kind of question, and yeah, I think you called it anger. Um, so that's I think, of course, very valid. And I think the mistake that I think a lot of people then make is to then try to fight a negative with a negative. So um, very often you see there's an issue, and I think a very common response is to kind of try and fight the bad guys, or try and protest against the thing that we shouldn't be doing, or things like that. And I think what I truly believe is that actually a much more effective way of solving problems is that rather than fighting the things that you don't agree with, actually build towards a future that you do agree with. Because eventually, um, we humans are unique in that we are able to collaborate effectively across large numbers, and that we can imagine things that don't exist yet. And I think really using the best of what humans have to offer, I think that has, of course, proven to be quite effective when it comes to, say, wealth, health, education, violence. I truly believe we do live in the best time humanity has ever seen, and the progress over the past 200 years has been tremendous. But of course, this had its side effects, and I think the way to solve that is not trying to sort of fight our inner demons, so greed, ignorance, things like that, but really use what we're good at, and use sort of an optimistic way to solve problems. So at the beginning, I really made quite a conscious decision to, I think I could have gone and say protest the use of certain plastic objects or things like that. And I think there is a role for that. And I think, and unfortunately, a lot of people take that role. But for me, and especially since I've always had this passion for engineering, I think it just made a lot more sense to see, rather than seeing this problem as a conflict, let's see it as an engineering challenge, something to be solved. And yeah, and I think there are more problems in the world that sort of deserve a sort of an engineering mindset, and could use an engineering mindset rather than a sort of a mindset of conflict.
That's a wonderful train of thought. You said a couple of things in there that are really important to me. Uh, you said starting is critical, and I agree.
Hmm.
It's so easy to rail and think and complain and gripe, but actually, if you want to change something, you got to start. And you need to restart when things go wrong, and then to
Hmm.
build towards a future that you want. I think that's a wonderful example of an attitude that has set you apart. So it's really nice to hear you say those things. I just want to quickly go through the sequence. So in 2015, you had all those vessels go across the Pacific or between Hawaii and California and get a sense of the problem. 2016, next year, you were deploying your first prototype, which you
Hmm.
beautifully called Boomy McBoomface, your first
Yeah.
big plastics collection boom out into the North Sea. And then 2017, 2018, new versions of it, modifications. You did 273 scale model tests, and you had 6 at sea prototypes, so that by 2018, you were ready to deploy system, I don't know how you call it, system number one, system 001 or whatever, heading out from San Francisco. Just quickly, for the folks that aren't super familiar, how once you had been through defining the problem and set your aspirational goals, and now you were building the hardware, and now you're coming out of San Francisco in 2018, and you, how does it work? What was your system supposed to do on that first day, and what did you learn?
Yeah, no, so how it works has actually evolved quite a bit over the years, and yeah, so the basic principle is to deploy artificial coastlines where there are no coastlines. So what we see is that beaches are actually very effective ways of collecting plastic, and yeah, so when you see plastic on the beach, it's out of the ocean, stays out of the ocean, so that's actually a pretty good thing. But of course, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, it's so far away from shore. There are no coastlines there. You just have kind of a tiny bit of Hawaii skimming the edge. So Hawaii does receive quite a substantial amount of plastic, but of course, it's really tiny compared to the patch itself, and especially the center is so dense that that's not what Hawaii actually encounters. So then we said, well, um, can we use the force of the ocean to corral the plastic and let the ocean clean itself? That's what we called it. So the idea was to put those systems in there and let them be driven by the wind and to be pushed forward so that the systems, which are kind of U-shaped barriers, would go faster than the plastic, and that way corral it, concentrate it, keep it in the system until a vessel would periodically come, empty them, and bring the plastic to land for recycling. So that was the basic idea. We spent years modeling that, years doing many tests on the hardware, survivability, things like that. And then 2018, the big moment. We everything came together. We said, okay, we believe we're ready to actually build the first pilot cleanup system. We launched it from San Francisco, which was an absolutely great moment. We took it through the Golden Gate. A few weeks later, we were in the patch. We deployed it, and then not much happened. So first, the plastic actually didn't stay in the system, so it sometimes went inside, but then was able to leave again. So it wasn't actually capturing it, or it wasn't retaining it. And then it was just a few weeks before New Year's Eve, and I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, do some emails, and then I got a text from our head of operations back then, and what she said was, we have a problem. We now have 2 cleanup systems in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and so it turned out that there was actually I believe, a 20-meter end section of the system that disconnected from the rest of the system, and yeah, and which forced us then to go back to shore. And then what followed were I think 2 months of root cause analysis, both on the retention issue as well as the structural issue. And yeah, it turned out that it was really a detail that was probably, say, a quarter of an inch by inches, but like this tiny, like the size of your fingernail. Really, that caused a very localized, higher stress in the system, which then eventually propagated through the entire structure and caused it to disconnect. So to me, that's what's so fascinating about engineering is you have these systems and you just need one tiny piece to malfunction, and it can be critical for the entire functionality.
Yeah.
So so
It's
that was
exactly the same thing for rocket ships, for sure. We're counting on every tiny little piece, but it's now brought you to, of course, you learn a huge amount from failure. You learn almost nothing from easy success. But when things go wrong, that's when you realize where your engineering problems are. And you're on the brink now of ocean cleanup. I don't know, what do you call it? Version 2, which has, I think I understand, a beach is fixed, but you've got like a sea anchor, so it's moving a different speed than the plastic. So it'll help with the collection. Is that where you are now?
So a few things happened there. So eventually yeah, I do agree. You learn a lot from failure, and we did. So I think within a few months we redesigned the whole system, and actually the summer, really next summer, we were out again with the system, what we call System 1B, and then we were actually able to collect the first plastic from the garbage patch. So we really went from the deepest point of our existence to really a great success, sort of a first proof of concept in yeah, really sort of 6 to 9 months time. So but yeah, those were tough moments. You learn a lot about yourself and about the team, and but still I do prefer to learn from successes over failures. I think if you look at
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, there is almost like a sort of a fetishization of failure, where people say like, "Oh, failure is good," and I mean, you still, I think, should aim for success, and you should try your best to not fail. But if you never have any failures, I think you are probably not innovative enough. You're not moving fast enough. So yeah, never been done before. It was to be expected that things didn't go according to plan, but fortunately, the team was really resilient and was able to take the right lessons from it. And 1 year later, we actually were in Vancouver and brought the first shipping containers of plastic back to shore. So that um, was quite a 2019 was quite a ride. And of course, System 1B was still kind of what we call minimum viable product. So small as possible, as simple as possible, but not yet actually ready to scale. So that's now the big assignment that we're up for next year, is to build System 2, which we aim to actually be scalable. So the one that we can actually then further optimize and then really scale to a whole fleet to clean the whole patch in a matter of years. So yeah, so and there's quite some learnings again. Of course, we're doing a lot of testing now as well, and but yeah, I'm pretty excited about the direction the design is going now.
Yeah, so am I. And it's been pretty hard won. You're only 26, but you've been at this for a decade, and so it's not like it was overnight success. Huge amount of failure and slogging in amongst the successes. And it's great that you're almost at the point now of assembly line deployment of a functioning system. But you did look, I think, at a couple other parts of the plastic life cycle that it's not really a failure of your design, but it's an adjunct to it. And that was, how is the plastic getting into the ocean? And you mentioned it earlier a little bit about coming through the rivers. And for the last 4 or 5 years, you've been developing sort of a parallel project that you call Interceptor. Can you just talk about that briefly, about how that fits in with everything else you're doing?
Yeah, so really to truly solve the ocean plastic problem, I believe we have to do two things. I think on one hand, yes, there is this legacy that we have to deal with, and I think that's very important. Again, it doesn't go away by itself. But the other side of the equation is the fact that there's still a lot of new plastic floating in rivers and flowing into the ocean every day. So rivers are really these arteries that carry the trash from land to sea. They're these plastic highways straight to the ocean, and what we then thought was, can we actually do something in those rivers? Can we place systems in the mouths of those rivers to intercept the plastic before it reaches the oceans? So, really, a few years back, we started really in a very similar fashion, just trying to understand the problem. So, went to a bunch of rivers around the world. We did measurements in them. And then what we found was that actually just 1% of the world's rivers is responsible for about 80% of all plastic flowing to the oceans. So really with a relatively modest intervention, you could actually have this huge impact. And of course, what we thought was, well, intervention in rivers, that's not the only thing we should do. Of course, it would be even better if the plastic wouldn't end up in the river in the first place. But of course, when you think of waste infrastructure and legislation and things like that, these are notoriously fast and slow moving systems, right? So then we thought, well, can we do something in rivers to have this rapid impact to stop the problem, to stop plastic going into the ocean tomorrow rather than in a few decades from now? And that's why we then developed what we call the Interceptor, which is an autonomous and solar-powered device that you put in the mouths of rivers. It uses the flow of the river to bring the plastic in, and it stores it, can take up to, say, 50 to 100,000 kilos of trash out per day.
Wait. Say that again. Say that number again.
Yeah,
That's a huge number.
So every interceptor can, we think, collect up to 50,000 to 100,000 kilos of plastic per day. So, which is actually what we need, because like the density, like the flows of plastic through these rivers have been really, really staggering. And so end of last year, we were ready to unveil this. We had the first units deployed, one in Indonesia, one in Malaysia. Now, actually, we just are deploying the third one in the Dominican Republic. And just standing on that machine in Malaysia and just seeing that constant flow of trash moving into the machine and knowing that that is not reaching the ocean and that we don't have to deal with it downstream, I think was just really, quite special.
You're right on the very precipice almost of what seems to be the success that you've been seeking since you were diving at 16 years old. You've done the work, you've built the hardware, you've failed, you've succeeded, you've improved the hardware. It's going to fail again, of course. I know at some point you said out loud, I just thought it was important to at least try. But how will you know when you've succeeded?
Yeah. No, I agree. It's quite this. We're quite in a critical phase now, where we started with a promise and just an idea, and now we're at the point that it kind of is coming together. I think we have with rivers, we actually have working machines. I hope with oceans we will soon also be actively operational. And and then it's really about doing it, implementing it, scaling it, and scaling it to those 1,000 rivers that we need to do, and scaling it to all those 5 garbage patches. And I think if we are successful with that, I think what should be achievable is to get to a 90% reduction relative to what we're seeing right now by the year 2040. So in 20 years, 90% less plastic in the ocean. I think that should be that should be doable. And I think we won't be getting every last piece of plastic out of the ocean, but I think 90%. I think would be pretty good.
I want to bring a guest in who is a water warrior, a very young hero that is here in my country, who is working to protect the water sources and to help provide clean water for all. It's very much in alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's also sort of an interesting adjunct to the work, Boyan, that you've been doing. Her name is Peltier. She's only 15 years old. She was born on the Wikwemikong unceded Anishinabek territory on Manitoulin Island. And she's spoken at the United Nations. And in fact, there's a film, a documentary that she's featured in called The Water Walker, that is at the Toronto International Film Festival. So, Autumn, we haven't met in person, but it is a delight to meet you here virtually.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Autumn, you've had a chance to listen to the conversation that Boyan and I have been having. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's great. And I want to talk really about what's important to you, and what who are the most important people in your life. You're 15 at this stage of life. You're almost at the age where a decade ago, where Boyan started to get a focus as to what he really wanted to apply his energies to. But who were the people in your life? What influences have brought you to the point that already you are in a position of responsibility within your extended community for the care and the long term health of the waters around you? What were the influences? Who were the people that made that happen in your life so quickly?
Well, the people that made an influence on the stuff I'm doing right now are actually my mother, my Auntie Josephine, and my grandfather. I was raised in a traditional lifestyle, learning my ways and learning my teachings, and I was always taught that water has a spirit and water deserves to be treated as a human. And so that's kind of what I was raised being taught. And my grandpa would always tell me stories about when he was a little boy, and I was I was not able to relate in that way because I'm so used to a more I guess say a more updated kind of lifestyle. And
Hmm.
what he would always tell me is that when he was a little boy, this is about I'm gonna say 60 years ago, or yeah, about 60 years ago, he was able to drink water from the lake, and he was able to just like go to any lake, river, stream, and he was able to take a cup and drink from from those bodies of water. And so when you look at it today, you can't do that anymore, and you could probably get sick, or even in some cases even die from doing that. And so it's just like there's been a drastic change in those times. And he always talks about how even there wasn't plastic when he was a little boy. They used to use things glass, and there would be what's the name of it, like bladders from animals, and that's how my people used to store things and recycle things, I guess you could say. And so you don't see that at all anymore. And my auntie Josephine, she was pretty much doing the work that I'm doing right now, and so she actually had a really big influence on me continuing and following her footsteps, because as I was a little girl and seeing her do this, at the same time she was getting older and more fragile and more ill, and it was becoming a lot more difficult for her to do this.
Can,
And
can you just
I
can you
thought to
just take a
myself,
moment? We haven't met your great auntie Josephine, who grew up, I guess, with your grandfather in a different time for the Anishinaabe. Can you just describe what your great aunt Josephine was like? What did she look like, and how did she speak? What sort of woman was she? She's passed away, I hear. So I'd love to know what she was like in your eyes.
well, my auntie Josephine was a very wise elder, and she was full of knowledge, and she was the one who created something called the water walk. And really, what that is when you walk around a body of water, praying and raising awareness. And so, if you ever heard of that, she's the creator of that, and she
Huh.
had a very big impact on a lot of people. And she has a lot of knowledge about my people and our history.
Huh. And that's the Wickwemacong First Nation.
Yeah.
Yes. And how has COVID affected the people of the Anishinaabe, of the Wecquamakong First Nation? Has COVID have an impact on everyone there as well?
Well, um, they're everyone's isolated, and I mean, like you can't really do much actually. So like, especially being on an island, there's like it's like a lack of access for being able to like leave and do like usual things, because there's a huge risk as it is a small place. So going to somewhere like a bigger city or bigger area is a higher risk of bringing COVID back with you. So
And the water walk that your great aunt Josephine taught you in, it's now your responsibility, right? And what is a water walk like for you? What season is the best season to do a water walk, and how does it make you feel?
Well, personally, the best season to do a water walk is the spring because it's going to be very difficult if you do it in the winter where it's freezing cold. But really, why I say spring is because there's like no stopping, and like basically nothing stops you. And like I've even personally walked through a rainstorm with my Auntie Josephine in Duluth, Minnesota. We actually the wind was so strong we actually almost flew off a bridge, but um, like that's just like kind of an example of like how nothing stops us. Like we they walk from anywhere from 3 a.m. till midnight, and they're walking all day, and it's just kind
Wow.
of that just shows how like how strong and like how strong our prayers are when it comes to that. And yeah, I think that's yeah.
There's enough time in that length of natural contemplation, I think, really to look at the time span, the history of things, and the fact that the changes that have occurred since your grandpa was a little boy and your great aunt Josephine. But in your eyes, now that the mantle of the same responsibility that she carried is on your shoulders, you must have thought about how can we best balance the human civilization and the billions of humans that exist with the reality of the natural world and still move into the future. So have you thought about how best we can balance those contrarian ideas?
Well, I think with that, I think that everyone needs to like build a relationship and everyone needs to work together. No matter what our race or color is or how old we are, we all need to work together and try and find solutions and because my people believe that everyone is like the same kind. We're all the same. Nobody's different and I think that's where um, something like that comes in and I think that our message is stronger when it's coming from more than one person, and if we work together, it is stronger. So, I just think building relationship.
That sounds like it very much mirrors the thoughts that Boyan has been talking about and the path that he's followed. Did you have any observations on what Boyan's doing, or do you think there's any application uh, within your own world, or did you have any questions for Boyan at all?
Um, I think I think my only like question would probably be um, if something like this could be done for the Great Lakes.
Sure. I'm not intimately familiar with the details on the plastic situation and the flows and the tides in the Great Lakes, but there's probably going to be plastic, and if our technologies are not applicable, there might be other solutions. So if there's any Canadians at the Great Lakes watching this, definitely invite you to explore that and yeah, and yeah, see how you could help there. I'm sure there are ways to have an impact on the plastic in the Great Lakes, but I would have to be more familiar with the details.
Mm-hmm.
Autumn, you're the as of last year, you're the chief water commissioner for the Anishinabek Nation, and for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, what they're talking about is protecting and restoring water-related ecosystems, and to ensure universal, safe, and affordable drinking water, and of course, to safely manage sanitation systems. All of those, I think, apply within the Great Lakes, and especially, of course, around Manitoulin Island. But the development goals wants to try and get those done by the end of this decade, by 2030. In your eyes, and with your newly assumed level of responsibility, how do you think we're doing?
Well, I think that I just hope that these commitments and promises are kind of followed through with because a lot of stuff that has to do with government and my people, a lot of the stuff is not followed through with, and there's a lot of broken promises when it comes to First Nations issues in Canada. And yeah, I just hope that it's followed through with, because there's even a community on on Manitoulin Island that has no access to clean drinking water for the past I think 13 years now, and nothing's being done about it, and they still continue to reach out and try and ask for help, but um, nothing's being done. So I just hope that their promises and commitments are followed through.
And what excites you the most at 15 years old? Actually, you have a birthday coming up pretty soon, right? So 16 years old. What excites you the most about the future that's coming?
Well, I think what excites me the most is, as I get older, the more serious and the more serious my work becomes, and I look at it in a more, I guess you could say, mature perspective. And um, as I get older, I get closer to choosing my career path. And with my career path, I actually hope to become a politician. And yeah, I just hope to be able to achieve that, kind of like what I'm doing right now with that career. And I think another one of my biggest excitements is knowing how many youth I've inspired, and seeing, like, the more I work and the harder I work, it's just seeing the more youth speaking up, and I think that's what excites me the most.
It excites me as well. Something that Boyan said earlier was maybe the problem is that people don't care. But his own research and personal experience in that was, it's not that people don't care. It's just people often get busy, or they're focused on the thing that they're doing, or they don't have an understanding of the complexity of the issue, or the issues that aren't right in front of them somehow aren't as important as the issues that are slightly beyond the horizon. And the way that Boyan has addressed it is to try and look at the core root of the problem and find ways that solve it for everybody, and then people will see it. And so I really admire your objectives here as well, Autumn, in that it sounds like it's quite similar. You need to develop yourself into someone who can then be in a position of influence, but also to become not just personally aware of the issues, but, as you say, with other youth and other people, all ages, to bring the issue into the public discourse, so that it becomes something that we want to solve together. I think even though you're both in the earlier stages of your life compared to me, I'm very impressed with not just the work you're doing and the impact it's having, but the attitude and the people that you are behind it. Autumn, the level of responsibility that you have been willing to shoulder within your community, but also within the extended world, is really commendable. I admire the way that you have internalized the lessons of your grandfather, but more importantly, of your great aunt, your great auntie Josephine, and carrying those extremely valuable ideas of being not just a water warrior, but the chief water commissioner into the future. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do next, and I wish you great success. And I look forward to us meeting live and in person as soon as the fates allow.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your important work, and I feel old, actually, knowing that you already doing work age 15. So thank you, and keep going.
What an amazing person. I mean, both of you at that young age, doing things so far beyond the normal sphere of what a typical kid at 15 or 16 is doing in high school, self included. Um, Boyan, the last piece of dealing with plastics, of course, is in, now that your machinery has collected them to the point of hundreds of thousands of kilograms, of course, what do we do with it? And how do we somehow put it back into the land-based environment so that it's not just as harmful there? So What have you been working on for that final piece of the life cycle of plastics here on this planet?
Yeah. So it's actually a question that's harder than it sounds. So it's not just that we can say, okay, once it's out of the ocean, we're done. We have to do something useful with it, and we actually an opportunity also to create value from it. Because I don't think there would be anything more sort of poetic if the problem can become a solution by valorizing the material, by making it into something that people actually want, and by then using all the proceeds of that to then actually continue the cleanup of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that's something that we're currently exploring. I think we're soon ready to actually launch the first thing we made from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and yeah, and I think it's going to be something really cool, and yeah, I hope it can actually make a real big dent in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
So instead of just treating it as garbage, but actually look at it as a viable raw material for a commercial product, so that then I guess maybe you could at least subsidize, if not pay for the ocean cleanup itself.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. And eventually, so the big problem is when you look at the plastic that ends up in the ocean and that we intercept in rivers and that we collect from the patch, it's all stuff that has either lost its value or never had value. And that's why we believe it's so important to turn it into something valuable, because if people value it, they will take care of it and it won't end up back into our water. So so doing something with it, it's more than just a way to fund the cleanup. We actually believe it's sort of the right thing to do.
That closes out the cycle beautifully from the uses of plastic that to a large degree improve the quality of life, to taking responsibility for where it is that we jettison it when we're done with it, but then to try and turn that plastic back into something that has a lasting value. It's an amazing process that you've inserted yourself into, and it's great to see the successes you've had already at this stage. Um, However, I think you and your team, in the spirit of all of this, and with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, you're not only facing all the challenges yourselves, but I think you have a challenge for me. Is that true?
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, our team has a challenge for you. So maybe we can look at the video.
Hi Chris, this is Manon from the Ocean Cleanup, and we're currently in the headquarters in Rotterdam, and this is Reinder.
Hi Chris, and as you might be aware, we're working very hard here at the Ocean Cleanup to get our oceans clean. Currently with the Ocean team we develop a system to remove the plastic from the ocean. Very big challenge, but last year we finally managed to get something out with our own hands.
So this is the plastic and we're sending it to you. And well, we challenge you to turn this into something wonderful. Just be creative and surprise us. Make it amazing. Good luck.
Well, Boyan, thank you to your team for putting that together, and just looking at the variety of what the trash can be. If you just look at it in a new light, it's not just something to hide and get rid of. Obviously, it's something to try and evolve it and turn into something practical. And I grew up on a farm, and I'm an engineer by training, and I'm deeply interested in the sustainable health of our planet. So I'll do my best to be part of this cycle and to do your team proud. So thanks for the challenge.
Pleasure.
Boyan, every chance I've had to meet you and hear what you're doing publicly has not only been delightful, but it's made me reevaluate how I think about my own activities. It's inspiring to see what you're doing, and the tenacity and the drive and the get on with it kind of attitude that you put into it. I think you're a really fine example to people all around the world. And especially right now, as we deal with this global pandemic, to have an example of someone who can be working sustainably to deal with one of the problems of the world. and to have organized a group of people to really understand it, and to be right now on the precipice of not only cleaning up the 1% of the world's rivers that contribute the worst to our plastic pollution getting into the ocean, but also hoping that the latest version of the technology can clean up the plastics that exist in the oceans themselves. The fruit of your labor is almost upon us, and it's an exciting time. I'm really looking forward to seeing this phase start changing the world. And the next time we meet in person, I'm looking forward to shaking your hands and congratulating you on the successes you've had so far. But even more important than that, you're only 26. I'm really cool and excited to see what it is that you're going to do next. Nice to see you again.
Well, thanks so much for the lovely conversation. It's always great to see you. And yeah, thank you for giving us a different perspective on our planet. And we will do our best to have a good impact on it. So
great, and I hope you like what I make out of the garbage that you retrieve from the Pacific. I'll do my very best. Take care, and thanks to you and your team.
Bye.